Hello, if you can read, unlike me, then you probably know I'm doing something a little bit different today. So as you know, Genshin has a wide cast of characters, and a lot of characters kind of do the same thing as others. There ends up being a lot of replaceability with some characters. But my question is, who of these characters are totally unique? Who are the honored ones? So today, I want to go over that and point out who is truly unique. Real quick, I would just like to ask, please like and subscribe to help me in the YouTube algorithm. It'll only take 2 seconds and you can always unsubscribe later. A bit of a disclaimer is Genshin is a very contextual game and not every character will be a perfect replacement for each other. Every character has its own niche that it can use, but in generalist terms, yes, I will be talking about who can replace who. And of course, every character has its pros and cons, like our first example, which is Sucrose versus Kazuha. Animo has a lot of characters that kind of do the same thing, but it's mostly just a Sucrose versus Kazuha thing, where Sucrose is a bit harder to use, Kazuha is way easier to use, so that's why I would put him as better than Sucrose as a replacement, but in reality, they're more equal in power. So do please keep in mind, I'm kind of talking more generalist with this. Each character probably has its own niche, its best use cases, like Jean and Farina teams. That right there is actually half of Animo, because Animo works very similarly. Speaking of the other Animos, we have the Animo DPSs, which it's mostly just between Xiao and Wonderwear. They're about equal in power, it just depends on your playstyle preference. And there's Aizo. And this just leaves us with our last Animo, which brings us to what I want to talk about today, which is the honored ones. And our first honored one goes to Farazan. She is the only dedicated Animo buffer in the entire game. Farazan is essential for every Animo DPS, and I don't think you would want to go without her, even if she is not C6. She is that important. Now, some could say that Farazan is not unique in buffing Animo, since technically Shen Yun buffs Animo, but in teams that you would use Shen Yun, you would also want to use Farazan in addition to her. And speaking of Shen Yun, here comes our second honored one. Shen Yun! That's right, Shen Yun is more than just an Animo buffer as well, that you probably know. She is the only dedicated plunge buffer, plunge enabler in the entire game, so she also earns a place as an honored one. While she does kind of fill the role of Kazuha, places where Kazuha could be slotted in, but because of how unique Shen Yun is, that you can enable this plunge gameplay with any character, that has earned her the title of honored one. Now that we're done with Animo, let's move over to Pyro. Let me first just say, I don't know where to put Amber. She kinda can be a DPS, but she also can be like a support where she like distracts enemies with her Baron Bunny, but I don't know where to place her. I just figured I'd mention her. And over for supports, we have, of course, Bennett, which is, he is him. If you need a Pyro attack buffer and healer, he is the one to go to. While Bennett is the best at what he does, he is not unique in being an attack buffer and healer. So that's why he is not an honored one. Next, we have the Pyro Shielders, which we have Xinyan, who's using Xinyan. So it's mostly between Toma and a C4 Yanfei. And Takefei is actually pretty useful because she has no Pyro application, whereas Toma does. So it really just depends on what you need for a Pyro Shielder. I would just probably assume Toma's shield is stronger than Tankfei's, but again, very contextual game. It just depends on your needs. Pyro is pretty unique where it has a ton of DPSs. A lot of DPSs are pretty mediocre. I would say it's mostly a competition between Hu Tao and Arlecchino. Now between the two, if you're considering constellations, I'd say Arlecchino squeaks out on top, but none of them compare to the Archon of Pyro, Xiangling. I know Xiangling doesn't exactly fill the same role as all these other on-field DPSs. She is an off-field Pyro DPS, but she's like one of the only good off-field Pyro DPSs. I know Dea kind of is sub DPS, but she shines elsewhere, which, by the way, speaking of Dea, that brings us to our first Pyro Honored one. Dea is actually one of the honored ones, not for her sub DPS pyro application that is completely subpar, to be honest, but I'm not here to trash on her. I'm here to shine some praise on Dea because she is one of the only damage mitigation characters in the entire game. More like Fu Xuan from Honkai Star Rail, where if your character takes damage, it will redirect it to her and she will take the damage at a reduced rate, and your on-field character will have lessened damage. And she is the only character who actually does this, and that alone makes her an honored one. We have one last character that is an honored one out of Pyro. The one, the only. Chevreuse is also an attack buffer and healer, but her kit is all about enabling overload. No other character has Electro and Pyro Shred built into your kits, and no other character enables overload team comp. At C6, Chevreuse also does buff Pyro and Electro damage bonus. Since a lot of her kit is locked behind being overload, she doesn't exactly do the same thing as Bennett, and that is what makes her unique enough to be considered an honored one. Moving on to our next element, Hydro. First up, we have the classic comparison of Xingqiu versus Yelan. I would say they're about equal in their utility of Hydro application, but Yelan definitely has more damage, and Xingqiu has a slight defensive capability of increasing your poise, along with a slight bonus of healing. After that, we have our Hydro DPSs, none compared to the Hydro Dragon. I'm sure you would expect no competition there when it comes to Hydro DPS. Now over for our damage boosting and supportive capabilities, there's a direct power creep of Mona. Everyone knows Mona as the damage per screenshot character. Farina, it just does what she does better. Over in our Hydro healers, I would say Barbara is pretty much outclassed by the other Hydro healers. It's mostly a competition between Sigwini and Kokomi, and Sigwini also has pretty great synergy with Farina. She is usually best in slot for Farina teams when you need a second Hydro. Before we get to the honored ones, I do want to make an honorable mention of Nilou. Now, Nilou is pretty unique in enabling blooms. Technically, Kaveh also enables this bloom gameplay, being significantly worse, of course, but I definitely did want to put Nilou as an honored one. But as soon as I remembered Kaveh, I knew I couldn't. So that's why she's here as an honorable mention. Now, to the real honored one. Our honored character of the Hydros is Cadence. And while she infuses your character with Hydro, she also boosts their normal attack damage. I do know Yoon Jin does this too. Cadence makes it as an honored one because of her ability to infuse your character with Hydro. There is no other character who can infuse your normals with Hydro. Now moving on to probably one of the most complex elements, at least for this video, is Electro. Just like Amber, I want to mention Lisa here. I don't know if I should put her in DPS or if I should put her as a support because she is one of the few characters who can shred defense. I do know you can use Lisa as a sort of defense shred support, but she doesn't do anything unique, so it's hard for me to say where she stands, but I figured I'd mention her here. Firstly, I'll be talking about the supports with Electro. A lot of Electro utility comes from being able to apply Electro. So in terms of Electro application, Kuki and Raiden is pretty good, but they don't compare to Fischl versus Yai. Fischl and Yai are about equal, it just depends on gameplay preferences. Now, with Electro application talking about Hyper Bloom, it leaves no competition that Raiden and Kuki are queens of this category. And Electros have another support category where Electro is a energy support where they refund energy or give you energy. This is really just Traveler and Dory, which, I mean, who's really going to be using them for their energy support? The queen of this would have to be Raiden, of course. She is the energy support because of her capability to refund energy to your characters. And now we move on to our DPS section. And Raiden is also here as well, but only at C2. Raiden needs high investment in order to compete with other Electro DPSs at C0. If I were to say who is the best Electro DPS, I probably have to say Chlorine just because she's the most recent character. Now, with that out of the way, we have our Electro Honored One, which is gonna be Zethos. Zethos is an Electro DPS, but he is unique in that he takes his own energy in order to do damage. And no other character so far does that. That is why he has earned the title of Honored One. To start off the Dendro, let's talk about the shields. I just want to say Kirara is probably the go-to shielder if you need just a shield, that is. Her shield is definitely going to be stronger than Baizu's, but again, Baizu has that bit of healing, and when it comes to healing, I'd say Baizu is probably the one who squeaks out in the healing category just because of its ease of use. While Yao Yao does have a bit of a higher healing ceiling, it is kind of hard to use her healing through this full capability along with her Dendro application, which is all burst lock. So unless you're doing a Yao Yao Candidate's Nilu core, it's hard to make good use of Yao Yao. In terms of pure elemental application, Nahida is the go-to, obviously. Kole and DMC is a pretty good option, but none of them can compete with Nahida's out of this world application. The DPS category for Dendro characters is a bit interesting. We have Tignari, which he's a standard character, but it's mostly between Kenichi and Emily. Pretty much equal to Alhaitham, aren't too compared to because their two playstyles are entirely different. I would have loved to put Emily as an R1 just because of her ability to enable a burning team, but since Kenichi came out and he basically does that too, I just don't feel like I could have entrusted them with the title of an Honored One. Also, I find it a bit disappointing that they don't actually change burning at all. They just use it to enable their higher multipliers or to be able to have longer DPS times. And again, honorable mention, Kave, and sadly, none of the characters could have earned the title Honored One in Dendro, at least yet. We still have yet to see a new Dendro character come out that is entirely unique. But Dendro is also a younger element, so maybe in the future there will be a Dendro character who is worthy of the title Honored One. But as of right now, there is none. Now, to move over to the Forgotten element, we're going to talk about the Forgotten character. No one ever uses this character, so could she be an Honored One? It's something to think about for sure. So when it comes to shielding, Cryo, I definitely would say Layla probably has a stronger shield, but Diana, because of her battery capabilities, I think she would squeak out above Layla. Also, Diana has that healing ability, which, talking about healing, it definitely is a toss-up between Diana and Charlotte. It would just depend on what you need for the team. Do you need a full party healer, or are you okay with having single target healing? Oh yeah, Chi-Chi is there. In terms of off-field cryo application, I probably would put Rosaria over Kaya. I think Rosaria's cryo application AoE is a bit wider, and also you can get a bit of crit rate from her. Now, over for our cryo DPSs, I actually would separate them in two categories. Even though physical isn't really an element, it kind of acts as a different element, if you know what I mean. I know Femine is also technically a shattered DPS, but shatter is just another form of physical damage. Yovel is a 5-star, so she's probably better than Femine in a physical team. For our pure cryo DPS, I'd say it's probably a toss-up between Ayaka and Ryosley. If I had to guess, I'd probably say Ryosley. He's a newer character, and newer characters usually have a bit of a higher DPS than older characters. And now, lastly, for our cryo characters, we have our Honored Ones. First up for an Honored One is Chongyun. Just like how I put Candace as an honored one, I also put Chongyun as an honored one because he is one of the few characters who can infuse others with cryo. Our next honored one is Mika. I know some of you forget Mika exists, but he is the only dedicated physical buffer, and that is why he has earned the title of Honored One. Now, Mika also does boost attack speed, and that's usually what he is used for, which I think is quite funny how a dedicated physical buffer isn't that good at being a dedicated physical buffer, and he is instead just used for his attack speed utility. Our next Honored One is Shenhe. Since you've been watching this long, I'm pretty sure you could have guessed that Shenhe would make it to the Honored One list. Shenhe is the only dedicated cryo buffer. She decreases the cryo res of enemies and boosts the cryo damage of characters in your party. That is why she has earned the title of Honored One. And lastly, our second forgotten element, Geo. And when it comes to Geo shields, Zhongli, he is him, no competition. In terms of Geo constructs that do damage, it's mostly between Albedo versus Chiori, but Chiori, if you can get her second doll with a second construct, her DPS will definitely outpace Albedo's. For construct utility, it's really just between Niguang and Traveler, whoever one you need. Traveler does boost crit rate by 10%, and Niguang has a big ass screen that boost your Geo damage when you walk through it. Now, for the Geo DPS, Ito is more of a mono Geo character and Navia is more of a rainbow-ish character. It just comes down to preference of team style. I do want an honorable mention of Yunjin. Yunjin does boost attack speed and normal attack damage, but technically Candace does it too. But Yunjin has the benefit of not infusing your characters with Hydro, because for some characters that can definitely be a detriment. And now, our Geo Honored One is Thorough. He is the dedicated Geo buffer, and he is the premium Mono Geo character. You basically cannot play Mono Geo without Goro without suffering heavy damage loss. That has earned him the title of being an Honored One. On screen now, these are our Honored Ones. These are the most unique characters in the entire game. These characters are the ones who cannot be replaced or cannot do what other characters do. What do you think about my picks? Do you agree? Do you disagree? Did I leave someone out that you think should be an Honored One? Or do you think I picked an Honored One who shouldn't be up here? Well, that is all for today. Hope you have a good day. Good luck on your polls. And I'll see you next time.